Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I would like to talk about apartments, specifically renting apartments and shopping for them. This is the thing, I thought I might have talked about it once before, but I tried to look it up, and I've done many personal times, but I couldn't find one that indicated I'd done this before. Maybe I've talked about roommates in the past. But anyway though, apartment shopping, this is the thing, I've actually bounced around from place to place a fair amount. Because I would go to college and then I would move someplace and then, switch jobs. And it's all sort of been in sort of the Kansas City area because that's where I live. But I bounced around the Kansas City area enough to pick up a bit of experience and learn some of the pitfalls of apartment shopping. And one of the more interesting things though is going back and forth between college towns and regular towns. Because I find that there are different kinds of scams that go on. Like in a regular town where people just sort of live, and they're having families or going to work or whatever, you find that you get scams where there's a nice cheap deal, and it turns out it's a little bit too good to be true. You get these weird things going on where it's all run by maybe an independent guy, and he's just charging you through the nose or forgetting that you paid him and then sending eviction notices and things like that. And anyway though, yeah, I just thought I would talk about kind of how that went. My very first apartment actually was a pretty good deal, and this is one thing that probably got me off to a wrong start with apartment shopping, was my family helped me look for this place, and I moved in with a girlfriend. And her family helped as well. So between the two of them, between the experienced adults, they were able to find a really nice apartment with good reviews, and everything was nice and solid. I moved in with my girlfriend at this place. And the only complaint that I had, and this was rather weird, but it was solved kind of by sheer fortune, was the landlord, for some reason, felt it was cool to just walk into a place. If he knocked on the door and you didn't immediately come to the door, then he was totally fine with just unlocking the door and coming in. And I don't know why this landlord did this. It was the only thing that he did. He did this early on, as we first moved in. But it was solved because, weirdly enough, our door had another lock that you could put on it, and it wasn't a key lock. It was just something that you did, kind of, they have those slider chains, but instead of a slider chain, it was you just twisted it, and it would put the lock into place. And my landlord really disliked this lock because at least twice he tried to just open up our door and walk in, and like I say, I don't know what his deal was or why he did this. Especially because there was there was a young man and a young woman living together for the first time here. The odds of him walking in on something that probably we wouldn't want him to walk in on were pretty high. I don't think that was his motivation. He was an old guy. I think that he just... I don't know what his deal was. Yeah, for the first year though, he did that for a little bit, and then he remembered that there was that lock on the door, and so he kind of quit doing it. Maybe he walked in once or twice when I wasn't in the apartment, but I guess this is a thing that landlords can do. They technically own the property. It was a bit of a surprise to us that your landlord can just do that, but I guess that they can. And you find that on some properties, landlords actually will do this all the time. They know that they own the place, so they'll just kind of open up the doors and walk in. I've heard horror stories about young women living in places and having a male landlord, some guy in his early 40s or whatever with a beard and a beer belly, drinks a lot. It just opens up the door and just comes in, has a look at the place, just being yep, just checking for damages, making sure there's no bugs or anything else like that. Yeah. This place that I got in, though, aside from that little bit of weirdness, it was actually a family-owned deal. It was a family had bought this property, and they were just taking care of it. So, for most problems, it was I was either speaking to the guy's wife or his son did all the maintenance. His son was the maintenance guy, and the two of them, his son and his wife, always knocked, or they always made schedules. They sent you an email to be I will be coming by at such and such time. I will knock on the door. Please be there to let me in. And they never let themselves in. Unless we okayed it previously, so that was pretty polite. Just had that one little bit of weirdness. But that was a pretty good situation that lasted for a good couple of years, about 3 or 4 years, until I split up with that girlfriend. And she left, and I just had the apartment. I had to fill the place. After she left, my new roommate, this is kind of funny, I only have ever had one roommate who was a nice, clean guy, who looked after the place. But she left, and then for a while I used Craigslist, and I did a couple of interviews, and I finally found somebody, and he was yeah, I'll move in. And then he was nice and clean. He always washed the dishes, he looked after his room, except he smoked ridiculous amounts of pot. And this was a problem. It was he was a really clean guy, really nice guy, and then he would just smoke like mountains of pot. And so if you ever opened his door, it was just like, oh man, like you have, wow, that's gonna smell like pot for a long time. He actually, what he wound up doing in the end is he had to relocate again for work, but he had to relocate like 2 months before the lease was up. So what he did is he just paid money down. Like I said, he was a nice guy, but he just paid money down for like those 2 months. And essentially what I did is I left the window open for like a week or two or something like that. And luckily that cleared up most of the smell. It didn't smell like pot anymore after I'd done that. I just had to let the place air out for a while. You know, closed it. I was very mindful about it. Like I closed it, but this was like he left like around when the weather was decent. It was just one of those very fortunate things, because otherwise my landlord would have come by and have been like, this is gonna cost you a little extra. But that's on getting the deposit. I got the deposit back, and this was fortunate. Was like I say, this was a little family-owned place, and they had a good reputation. And so when I left, they gave me back the deposit. The next place that I moved into was actually another good setup, and this was a place like a friend of mine had moved in, and then I just came in to be his roommate. The situation had been that like one guy he'd moved off to Oregon or someplace like that. He moved off to Portland. And so my friend was like, oh, you know, hey, I need a new roommate. Like, Greg, you're coming in from out of town. Do you want to like come live with me? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. And at this point, like my friend had already been living here for a while, and this place also had a good reputation. It was a good deal. And in fact, I wound up, this is where I live now, actually, that same complex, because I lived there with my friend for a while, and I was like, hey, this was actually pretty good. I can respect this apartment, so I came back to him. But anyway, though, yeah, this was another one where I didn't really have a whole lot that was going on. You know, never had any trouble with bugs or anything like that. Well, I guess actually this roommate was fairly clean as well to some degree. He was like of a medium level of cleanness, where like he didn't really clean up after me and I didn't really clean up after him. But between the two of us, we really didn't have to clean that much because we're both reasonably like tidy individuals to some extent. You know, I don't know what to say. He would leave messes sometimes, and I would leave messes, and it bugged him that I didn't clean the messes, you know, except for when girls came over. Like, if a girl was coming over, I would clean the whole place. So, like, when I remember he really liked it while I was dating, because he was just like, yeah, like every time a girl comes over, you wash all the dishes, you clean the entire apartment from head to toe, and then you cook dinner, and you know, that's good. You should date more. Like, don't settle down with a girl, just date more. Just keep trying to impress women. So that was like the situation with that. But then after that, that's when I had to start actually like sitting down and looking for apartments on my own, because I had to move again. And this was like I was trying to go back to college. And so I went back up to the college town, and I looked at a couple of different places. And one place I was looking at was like a house. Oh, that's right. And speaking of houses, actually, I did live in a house before I moved. I can't recall when I lived in this house, but it might have been before I came back from the college town. But in any case, though, this house was another good situation that I lived in. As I asked around and I talked to some people, and I found a guy who had bought a house, and what he was doing is he was just renting out the house. And I've done some reading, and it turns out that this is getting more and more common. Essentially, after the housing crisis, after the housing bust, what they started doing is they did basically the no interest lending stuff, where you could take out a loan and then you would like not really pay any interest on it because the federal interest rate is 0%. So a bunch of wealthy individuals, what they did is they took out big loans and they bought houses and they flipped them. And so it went from there being like some 60% of houses were bought by families now to like 40% of houses are bought by families. And a big chunk of them got bought up by investors who are now, you know, either flipping the houses or selling them for rental. This was a guy who wasn't like wealthy, but what he did is he I think his brother and he or something like that put their money together and they bought a house, and then they tried to turn it around. They tried to make a profit off it by renting it, but the landlord was still living there. So I kind of went up there and I talked to him and I looked around the place. I got a nice look. He was very forthcoming about everything. Like I didn't see any problems with the place, and I moved in. You know, just very nice guy. Like we went over his sheet. You know, he looked at the room, and like we took note of things that were already damaged. And he never tried to like steal my deposit or do anything good or do anything no good. And this was actually a really good deal. Like just flat out like living with a guy who owned the house and who was like really nice and very personable. Was a pretty good deal, except for the fact that because he was very nice, he wasn't really hard on the people who applied to live at the house. And so at one point, we got this couple who moved in, and they were like, yeah, we just want to rent a single bedroom. And then they moved in, and they immediately couldn't pay rent, and they were doing drugs in the house, and like all kinds of horrible things. They were stealing dishes, they stole food. They told the landlord, my landlord was like, Greg, did you take my waffles? And I was like, no, I didn't take your waffles. And he's like, I didn't think you took my waffles. He goes, they told me you took all my waffles. I've got these pre-cooked waffles that I ate for breakfast. He goes, I just run out the door, I grabbed these waffles, that's my breakfast. And they were all gone this morning. And I was so mad because that's my only breakfast. He goes, I assume that you would have told me if you took my waffles, but you didn't take my. So yeah, so my landlord really upset. People were stealing his waffles. But yeah, he was just too nice. He was just a little too nice. Wound up being a great tenant-landlord relationship for me and him, but for this other group, these other two that he let in, it was just a disaster, and it created a little bit of trouble for me too because they were stealing my dishes and my food. I remember I had a whole bunch of garlic powder. And garlic powder, as a spice, it's like one of those things. It's not that expensive, but spices are always a little bit expensive. But they would just steal all my garlic powder. They would make themselves spaghetti and then just all the garlic powder, all of it. They just use it all. So they used all my garlic powder. I just remember these roommates. They were so terrible. But yes, yeah. Nothing really to take away from that except for just if your landlord is super, super nice. You have to almost watch out on his behalf. I was also kind of a nice guy. I remember I actually sat in during the interview. He invited me to the interview with these people. And I thought for sure he was going to turn them down because they were so trashy. The girl showed up and she was wearing a silver skirt that came up well past her knees. And they just looked greasy. And I assume so you're doing a background check on them, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure it'll come back fine. But yeah, it was all independent, so good deal for me up until the roommate situation. But otherwise, though, the place was well kept and everything like that. And I was able to talk to him on a regular basis. I would just come downstairs, have a drink and talk to him about politics and stuff like that. If I had any problems, I lived with the landlord, so I could just ask him what's going on. So that was good. Those are all my really good experiences with renting apartments. After that, I've had some really terrible experiences, and like I say, there's some weird scams, and these are the ones that I learned most from, because after you get burned once or twice, you start to get really wary of contracts. And these days, even on renewals, I look at contracts that I sign for places that are good, and I still kind of sigh and I get a little irritated. There's one thing that's been going on right now that's very frustrating. There are a lot of businesses and places right now that do what's called arbitration agreements, where nowadays instead of accepting legal liability in the normal way, what they do is they have in this contract, they say if you have any issues, you need to seek an arbitration in court. And they have all these stipulations about the arbitration. It's not like a standard thing, you don't go to court and then sue them. It's kind of you go to a legal arbitrator chosen by the company that you're trying to sue, and they decide what's fair. They say oh well, they did this and you did that, and so I think this is fair. And you're far less likely to get a good deal with the arbitration. I mean, if you get a good deal at all, most of the time you just get screwed. And lawyers have been talking about this arbitration thing as a silver bullet. It's so great for business. Businesses essentially are unable to be held accountable for bad practices. So you got to look for little things like that. You've got to know these bad laws that apply, and they vary by state. Some states make really bad laws illegal, but state to state, you find that there are some places that just have these completely illegal clauses. They're just awful clauses, awful clauses, and you have to look out for them. You have to be aware of them. That arbitration thing is one of them. If you see an arbitration clause in housing stuff, I'm not sure how common that is, but that's a huge red flag. That means that they are able to do things to you, and you will not be able to really enforce any of your rights right off the bat. You've agreed that you're only going to deal in this arbitration. So that's one. But there are a lot of other things that are just that are just weird, and that you would think that would be illegal, but the people who run the businesses know how to essentially screw you without quite breaking the law. And the best example I can think of is the absolute worst apartment complex that I ever lived in. And this was this place. What wound up happening is I was looking through Craigslist because it had success with that in the past. And at first I kind of looked at another house. This was another situation. A guy had bought a house, and he was looking to make some money. He was going to rent out a room. And you know, he was a nice guy. I talked to him. I checked the place out. You know, didn't see sign of any bugs or anything like that. He seemed clean. And then, you know, later on, his girlfriend decided that she would rather kind of keep the place empty. His girlfriend didn't want another guy living in his house. His girlfriend wanted the privacy. So he, you know, later on, like, he was like, yeah, okay. And then he got back to me and he's like, actually, I gotta cancel the order. I'm taking the house off. I'm taking the room off the market. My girlfriend doesn't want me to be renting out the room. And I was like, okay, all right, fine. But another person I talked to, though, there was this young girl, and she seemed really nice. She'd been going to school for a little while. She was trying to trade off her apartment, and so I went down to this place, this apartment complex, and I had a look around, and it seemed to be in kind of a nice area. It was fairly pretty. The rates were they were reasonable. They were a little high, but they were reasonable. And she showed me around her apartment, and she and her roommates kept the place pretty clean, and so it looked like a nice place. There were no bugs, there were no problems as far as I could tell in the space that she was living in. But the deal was, if I took the lease from her, it was because it was a college thing. They had this really weird setup where they were kind of taking advantage of college students, I think, and the whole thing was kind of run in a way that, in retrospect, was incredibly shady. And if I had known better, I never would have moved into this place because everything about it was terrible. What they did is, when I signed the lease, they told me, like, well, you're not actually going to get the room you looked at, because I mean, that's an all-girls room, right? That's an all-girls area. And then I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, whatever. I'll move in with some guys, I suppose. And they were like, yeah, okay, just here, we'll give you these forms, and you can look over some of these guys, tell us who sounds compatible, who doesn't. And I kind of looked them all over, and it was like people were responsible for writing out their own forms about themselves, so I just kind of looked at it, and I was like, yeah, I'm a fun-loving, walks on the beach, love mashed potatoes, and I was just like, yeah, that sounds fine, this sounds fine. You know, none of them said anything like, I am an asshole who stays up until 4 a.m. shouting and laughing through the paper-thin walls with my friends back in China. That was actually what I wound up doing, is I got moved into a place. My roommate, or the guy who was directly adjacent to me, was from China, and he was so loud. Like, he would stay up every night, and he would talk to his friends in China, and he would just, like, shout in Chinese, and it was really frustrating. He would shout, and he would laugh really loud, and he would do this on until, like, 4 a.m., and he would do it almost every night. Drove me crazy, drove me up the wall. But that's a roommate problem. That's not an apartment problem. What was really terrible about the apartment is they had a list of charges that they would lay against you if you messed up your apartment. And every complex pretty much does this. You always get this list of charges, like, you know, if we have to vacuum the place, that's $300. If we have to paint over the walls, that's $1,000. You know, it's always way overflated. You know, they're making a profit. If you damage the walls and they have to paint over it, then there's margins on that. They make a profit from painting over the walls. It's kind of upsetting, but that's how it is when you rent. So they had this list, and it was pretty long, and the lease package was really thick. I mean, like, it was about like twice the size of a normal lease package, and most lease packages are fairly large. This should have come as another red flag to me. Had I ever had to seriously look at a place, like if I had ever been screwed before, I would have flipped through that lease package and been like, nah, done, screwed, like, forget this. I also would have gone online and I would have looked up their reputation, because as it turns out, this place had a terrible reputation for essentially always stealing the deposit and then charging you over the deposit, because this is what they would do, is they would be like, yeah, you know, like dust, $500, like scratches on the walls, $600. And so they would come back every time somebody left. They would just, like, take the whole deposit and then charge them additionally. So they were essentially scamming people right out of money, and that's a thing that you can do, apparently. That's totally legal with the apartment thing. So what you have to do then with these kind of like little scam operations, if you wind up living in one of those, is when you move in, you get like a video camera and you tape the entire place before you move in. You make sure that none of the damages are there. And people think that this is excessive, but if you value your deposit at all, or if you, I mean, like, even if you value money outside your deposit, you really should do it. It's you don't have to, but you know, They say it's a really good way to get yourself ripped off of a whole ton of money if you don't like just spend an hour doing it. It's like if an hour of your time is worth like $500 or whatever your deposit is, then just do that. Just videotape your room, videotape the area, make sure you document every little damage. And then that way, when they try to charge you, you can be like, no, I've got like video evidence, like dated and showing this is how things are when I moved in. And this is especially important because, as I mentioned, I looked at the place, but what they did is they then assigned me a different room. And they sent me an email before they assigned me the room, and they were like, do you have time to come down and look at the room that we're probably going to assign you? And they gave a date. And I said, I will not be available to come down on that date. And they said, well, okay, if you don't come down, then we're going to assume the room is pristine. And if we find any damages when you move out, you'll be liable for them. And I said, well, I can't come down at that date, so like you know, I've already signed all the paperwork. Is there anything I can do aside from? And they're like, no. I mean, if you can't come down, you can't come down. We'll assign you your room, and there you go. That's it. You can't examine the room. And so sure enough, when I got down there, what turns out they did is because I couldn't come and examine the room, they'd had a guy who had completely trashed his bedroom. They told me, like, my roommates informed me, they were like, yeah, I don't know when he quit paying rent, but essentially what he did is he barricaded the front door with his mattress, and then he would sneak out the window on a regular basis. And this was to avoid, like, the landlord who kept coming around to try and get rent out of this guy. So when I tried to go in the room, it turned out that the door was still barricaded. And and so I went down there, and like I tried to open the door, and this is how I found out the story. Is I tried to open the door, and there was like a mattress in the way, and I'm like, hey guys, like I can't get in my room. There's something in the way. And they're like, oh yeah, that was Dickface. Yeah, he barricaded his door with the mattress. So I was like, oh, I would have assumed that the apartment staff would have come in and would have taken care of this before I moved in. And they were like, no, I haven't seen anyone since Dickface moved out. I don't think the apartment staff intends to clean the room. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, they told me that they're going to consider the room pristine. So sure enough, I managed to force my way into the room, got the mattress back on the bed, and sorted everything, you know, got at least enough leeway so I could look around. And there was garbage everywhere. Like, man, there was like food all over the floor. Like I went in the restroom. This guy apparently didn't know how to use the toilet. Like there was pee like all over the toilet. Like just all down the place. The bathtub hadn't been clean. The windows were covered in like, you know, just like watermarks and like toothpaste and stuff like that. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, oh, these people, like, man, the apartment just ripped me off with this, didn't they? So I had to go in and get a vacuum and like a bunch of cleaning supplies, and I just scrubbed that place head to toe. I did my best to make it pristine in the wake of this guy's damage and everything like that. Like he'd pulled out the screen for the window, and luckily I was able to get that back in there without any problem. Like there was no damage, he just pulled it out. And so yeah, just a catastrophic mess. Food, like the food was a big deal. The food being everywhere was a big deal. Because if that wasn't bad enough, like I mean I got that all taken care of. And I, you know, I contacted the apartment, and they were like, well, you know, if you didn't come in to have a look at the place before we assigned it to you, then, you know, it's your problem and you got to deal with it. Just totally unsympathetic. And part of the problem was that it turned out, because this was a little college deal, what they were doing is that they were hiring college students and then paying them virtually nothing. So every time I contacted someone, like none of the college students actually knew anything about landlord-tenant laws or anything like that, housing laws. They didn't know anything about any of the laws. So I used to get all kinds of different contradictory answers, and sometimes they would be illegal, but they would never commit anything to writing. Like if I emailed them, they would forward it to someone who did know the laws, and then they would give me some kind of vague answer. But if I walked into the office and I sat down and I talked to somebody, they would just like tell me things. And this came back to bite me in the ass later as well. You know, like they would just tell me things. And they would not even know what was in the leases is the big problem with this, because they would tell you something, or they would tell you to do something, and it would like void your lease if you followed their instructions. But they wouldn't know that. Like you're just some college student who's just like, yeah, oops, a little startled. What do I even own that makes that noise? Okay. Anyway, though. So they didn't even yeah, so they didn't know what was in the lease. They would just tell you to do things. So summer rolled around. Summer rolled around. I've been in this place before. Actually, before the summer rolled around, this was another thing this apartment did. Was while I was living there, like sometime in the winter, about 6 months in during the winter, I got a letter from this apartment complex. And at the time, I was planning to be in this little college town for like another year or two. I was doing some school-related stuff, and so I was going to be there for a while. So they sent me a letter about halfway in, and they said, "Hey, you need to sign another lease." And they said in the letter, if you don't sign another lease, then when your current lease expires, we may just remove you from the premises, and we won't allow you to sign a new lease. Like, you have to sign this lease now, or we won't allow you to live here anymore. And I looked at this, and I thought, well, that's strange. Like, I didn't know they could do that. That they could just give you like a preemptive, a decree like that, where they just say like, we will throw you out unless you sign this new lease in the middle of your lease. So it was like they asked for another year lease, and I kind of looked at it and I set it aside for a while, and eventually I decided that like aside from that initial fiasco, it wasn't too bad living there. Like my roommates were fine. The Chinese guy was a little annoying, but aside from that, my roommates were fine. The electric and heating bills were too high because the place had like really outdated cooling and heating and things like that. That was kind of a huge pain in the ass. But aside from that, though, it was passable. I was getting by. It was fine. Like living there was large enough space. The internet was fine. It was fine. It was working. So I said, okay, fine. I'll sign this new lease, and then I guess they won't throw me out. I get to stay in this place. What it turns out, though, what they were doing, and this is really interesting, is it's actually illegal to do that. At least where I live. If you live someplace, then a landlord has to offer you the option to renew your lease. And I don't believe that they can offer, like, I don't think that they can plan to throw you out. Like, they can't replace you before you do this. I'm not sure exactly how they had this worked out. But whatever they were doing, I think that it was illegal. What they told me they would do, I think was illegal. But it wasn't illegal to threaten to do something that was illegal. So they could come in and they could threaten to, like, to do virtually anything, and it wouldn't be within their legal rights. But as long as they didn't actually do the thing they threatened to do, they were fine. So, like, if I had just put that off until the end of the year and then decided then, I probably would have been fine. They probably wouldn't have been able to throw me out. Because, like, I don't remember this with exact clarity. But I did have to contact a lawyer about this place eventually because they were screwing me so much and doing so many things. What finally required the call to a lawyer is when summer rolled around, and bear in mind I'd already renewed the lease because they threatened to throw me out if I didn't renew the lease. When summer rolled around, ants showed up. And this was because the previous guy had consistently left food out, and so the ants remembered. The ants remembered where the food was. And so my room was just plagued with ants on a regular basis, and they were getting everywhere. They crawled around my computer desk, they got in my computer, like if I left food out, they got in the food. Of course, that's what they were looking for. They got in my bed, ants everywhere. It was awful. And so I contacted the desk. I went to the front desk, and I sat down and I talked to a guy, and I was like, yeah, my room is infested with ants. Can you please do something about it? And they were like, yeah, we do regular sprays. We're probably going to have another spray come out in, such and such time, so we'll spray then. And I was like, oh, okay. So I waited a few days, and the ants didn't get taken care of. So I went back out there, and I was like, hey, it's been a few days, and I'm still infested with ants. Can you send someone to take care of it? And they were like, oh, well, we already did the routine spraying. So, I mean, the ants should all be dead. And I was like, no, there are still ants in my room. The ants are not all dead. You can't just say the ants should be dead and then be like, oh, well, that's the ants' problem. There are still ants. I need help with the ants. And they're like, okay, we'll get someone on it. A few more days passed. Nobody had done anything about the ants. So I started sending them emails. And this got to be a thing where I kept telling them about the ants problem, and they kept telling me that they had resolved it. And every single morning I would wake up and there was these goddamn ants in my room. Like, it wasn't like a thing where there was, there was no doubt about it. Like, I had photos. I started taking pictures of the ants. This was the thing, is I was taking pictures and dating the infestation. And I was sending all these emails and just starting to keep records of like, man, like, look at this, ants every day. every single day, and I keep sending these emails, and they keep telling me the problem is resolved, and there's not a resolution. It's ants every single day, and this is when I decided I really didn't want to stay here for another year. I wish, like, if they'd sent me that lease renewal after the ants, I wouldn't have signed it, but it was too late. They had gotten me. So anyway, though, I had to get in contact with a lawyer, because a lawyer could help me get rid of the ants. This was how bad this apartment was. I had to contact the lawyer, and I asked him, I was like, so what do you do when your apartment landlord refuses to get rid of a pest problem? And so he guided me through, and he gave me this list of like statutes and things like that they were in violation of. And he goes, look, you need to cite these laws. You need to explain to them that if they don't resolve the ants within 2 weeks, then you know they're in breach of their lease, and you're free. You're in the clear. Like, no matter how long the lease is signed, no matter how many leases you signed, if they don't take care of this, they're just breaching the lease, and you're good to leave. So I notified them with this list of laws, and the very next day they sent in a guy, and he took care of the ants. And that was it. It was like they could have gotten on top of it at any point, but they didn't. They just argued with me about whether or not the ants were solved until I finally called a lawyer. And then they're like, oh, he got a lawyer. Okay, well, this is serious now. And then they took it seriously. So had to get a lawyer involved. Now, after that, I brought up the lawyer. I pointed out, I was like, well, they also told me to sign another lease, like, back in, December or whatever like that. And this has been just a fiasco. Like, am I really beholden to this? Could they really do that? And I don't recall exactly how he explained this to me, but essentially I was screwed. He goes, yeah, if your name's on the lease, then you're screwed. And I talked to him, and it was like, there's at least in my state, there are some laws about the way that they handle a tenant leaving. Like, if you have to leave, like if you abandon a property for whatever reason, like it's technically not legal for a landlord to just leave the property open and then extract rent from you. They also can't double dip. They can't intentionally fill the space and then still demand rent from you, even though you're no longer in the space. So there's a couple of things that are in theory there to protect you, but in practice they don't really protect. And I find this a lot. The more I ever learn about civil law, the more I find that in practice, most civil law only protects you if you have a lot of money in the first place. And so anyway, though, so he's just like, yeah, I mean, like, you're pretty much screwed unless you can find an out within the contract. And so I went to go talk to them about leaving, because it was an awful apartment. I was sick of them, like, not responding to stuff. Like, they were just a huge pain in the ass. And aside from that, I needed to relocate because I had picked up a job. This is like I think I was coming back to do something else. I picked up another job, and I was just moving out, and didn't want to be spending so much gas driving back and forth in and out of the city. So I explained to them, like, I need to move out. Like, for one thing, I hate you. For another thing, it's going to be way more convenient for me to be somewhere else. And so this was where I got into this trouble with the people at the front desk were just students they didn't know was in the lease. And so a guy was like, yeah, well, I guess you could always just sublet the apartment. And subleasing, what that is you find someone who will come in and they just pay the rent, and they essentially become responsible. And technically, I hold the lease, but then I just have someone else pay the rent. Yeah, subleasing, it's its own kind of thing. And I was like, okay, so I'll sublease the apartment, and that'll be fine. And that means that I don't specifically have to do anything weird, right? Like I just I have to set up my own deal and keep track of this person who's paying the lease. But if I snag someone who can actually pay this efficiently, then we'll be good. And he's like, yeah, just sublease the apartment. So I started kind of looking for subletters. And then I got my new place set up, and I settled down, and I got the paperwork signed. And this was after a little bit of another fiasco. I got screwed one more time by apartments, but I did get a place that was good, and I got settled down. Got all the paperwork signed up. And I remember talking to the place that I was moving to, and they were like, yeah, we contacted the place that you're at currently because, we don't usually accept tenants unless they if someone's in another tenant arrangement, we generally won't accept a contract because then you'll be taking on like 2 leases at once, and that's, not usually a great deal. But they at the front desk said that it was fine and that you could exit the lease anytime. So we're accepting the contract, and that should be good. And I was like, okay, yeah. They told me I could sublet the place. So yeah. So the apartment that I was moving to had gotten sort of a weird conflicting answer. They were just like, oh yeah, you could leave at any time. And I had been told that I could sublease. And what wound up really happening was that subleasing was against the contract. I don't think I don't think they gave me a copy of the contract. Like, I would have had to request it. This was another thing that was weird, is like normally, like the place that I'm at now, they gave me a copy of my contract, so I could actually go just check it anytime. But that place, you had to request a copy or something, something weird like that, or they kept it on a file and you had to go to the office and you could just pick it up. Like, you could access it, but I don't know, they were just a huge pain in the ass, huge, massive pain in the ass. So what turned out that they did is they allowed you to actually pass your apartment room onto someone else. You could give your lease to someone else. But the trick was, you had to pay a fee of $200 before you could do that. So they were like, yeah, you could just give your lease to someone else. We won't let you sublease, but we will let you give us $200 and then pass the buck on to someone else. And so that was incredibly frustrating. And so I tried to negotiate with them a little bit. And I was like, all right, well, if I have to find someone to just completely take over my lease, and you're going to take $200 from me, like, what if I do this? Can we exit, like suppose that I need to leave, because you told this other apartment company that I was going to be fine, and that I could just leave the lease. So I've already signed the paperwork, and I'm going to be stuck between two leases. Like, you're going to run me out of money, and I won't be able to pay either of you if you do this, if you just carelessly do this. I said, but I have enough saved up. Like, I could pay you, maybe 2 months of rent. Like I will let you guys, I'll vacate the room and I'll just pay you as if I was there for another 2 months. And in that time, if you guys want to, like, help sell this room, that would be fine. Like, if you fill this room in like a month, whatever. And I was talking to them, I had given them, like, this was a couple of months before I was going to move out even. So this was all, like, well in advance. Like, I had a plan, I was like working along. And so I was like, yeah, so like I could just give you, a couple of months of rent in advance. And that way, if there's a problem, you guys will have a few months of rent just in advance, and you can fill the room. And then if you fill it quickly, you can just keep my rent that I gave. Like, you just keep that money. Like, and that's a pretty good profit for you, theoretically, like, if you fill this room. And they were like, no, we're not going to do that. And I was like, and I asked them, I go, why? Because, when I applied, you told me there were only 2 rooms open. So you guys obviously are full most of the time, and you choose what rooms people go to. So, like, what's the deal? Like, why can't you just help me find a new tenant? Like, you have ads, you take out ads, people come in, and all this, and they were like, well, we'd really rather just, like, if we'd really rather extract a bunch of money from you, and then have you do all the legwork and everything else like that. They wanted me to pay the fee and also do all the work. So, yeah, they wouldn't take this deal. Like, they wouldn't accept that I could, I don't know, it was so weird. Like, you get into the law, and like I say, this was the thing, is I offered them this deal, because theoretically, they're supposed to fill the space if I leave it. They're not supposed to just keep it vacant so they can continue to extract rent from me, even though I left. And they're also not supposed to be double dipping. So, like, this proposition I made them was such that if they really did find a new tenant, they would have been in a pretty good shape. So I tried to negotiate, but they really wouldn't even have the negotiation. Like, I tried to send them emails and tried to talk them into, like, this is not what I want to do necessarily. This is just a contingency plan, because, oh my God, like, you told them that I would be fine. Like, you helped set up this situation, like, why don't you help me out of it? And they would just, talk to the hand, like, this is our situation, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to deal with it. So fortunately, what I wound up doing is I did find a guy who, he'd gotten in a fight with his girlfriend, and he was looking for a new place to live. And so I explained to him my deal with it. Like, I was honest with him about the apartment. I was like, yeah, they've given me a lot of trouble, but I tell you what, if you take this lease over from me, I will pay your first 2 months of rent. So I turned around, and instead of working with the apartment, because this is the funniest thing. If those assholes had just like worked with me, they would have had 2 months of rent from me plus 2 months of rent from someone else, and they would have made a profit. It would have been a better deal, because I was able to find someone, even though I was being upfront with all the problems the apartment has, and I paid them that money. Like, I paid them the money I was going to give the apartment anyway. I was like, here's 2 months of rent for you. Like, this place is terrible. Like, this is the best I can do when letting this place go. Or when giving this lease to somebody else. So this guy goes, yeah, okay. He goes, I understand. It's, but you got this for a year. You're paying the first 2 months, and he kind of looked around. And he's like, well, it's not so bad. You got the place cleaned up reasonably well, and I just got to get out. Like, so if you can vacate, like, next week, and by this point it was like a couple of weeks away or something like that before I had to get out of there. So it got down a little. It was a little hairy. It was a little like, I'm a little concerned. But yeah, I managed to get this guy. Got out of there, and man, after that, like that place gave me so much trouble. I took home quite a lot from that with the lease thing. But I did get screwed. I got screwed one more time, and I've since vowed not to be screwed again by another apartment complex. And that's not to say that they'll never screw me again. I mean, they will. There are places that are certainly going to try the next time I need to move or go somewhere. But one more time I got screwed, and this was I was looking at a place, and it was in kind of a nice area. It was like downtown, down in like a not downtown, but there was like a bunch of like food, groceries, stuff like that. It was in a good, convenient area, and the rent was pretty cheap. Like it was very affordable, and I thought to myself like, well, hey, this is probably a pretty good area. So they let me go see a model apartment, and this is a bit of a red flag. This is one thing, like if you go apartment shopping, try to do your best to get into the apartment they're going to give you. I mean, if you can at all, if they'll let you do it. Because in this case, what they did is they took me to go see a model apartment, and the model was of course clean and nice, and it looked really good. So I looked around and I was like, okay, yeah, this is pretty good. The price is pretty solid. How much? Let's maybe get started on the process of some of this paperwork and stuff like that. Because what they did, and this was another one that was weird, is they were like, well, you don't really sign the lease right off. What you do is you sign an agreement saying that we will screen you, and then you put down a deposit, and if you don't pass the screening, we'll give your deposit back. And I was like, okay, strange, but okay. So I gave him a deposit, and I gave him the money to screen me, and when I called them, they had no paperwork on me. There was no information. So I tried to call my bank, and I was like, hey, these people took my money. Can I cancel this thing? And my bank was like, nah, this is a civil thing between you and them. Like, you have to take them to court if you want your money back. And I was like, well, that's kind of a bitch. So they continued to insist that they had no paperwork on me. They had no information on file. They're like, yeah, we never took your money. We never did anything. We didn't do this. Like, we've never heard of you. And what I wound up doing is I contacted the Better Business Bureau, and I was like, yes, so this happened. And so then the Better Business Bureau got involved and started harassing them. And finally, I got that deposit money back. They managed to run off with like $60, but they didn't get to keep the deposit. The Better Business Bureau ran them down and got the money back for me. So that was good. That was the last time I ever got screwed by a apartment thing. But like housing, for all the regulations that are there, it's super weird because if you're not careful, there's so many ways to dance around the law and still rip people off and steal their things. Like I say, that example with just the that one was particularly funny because I remember coming in after I'd contacted the Better Business Bureau, and the landlord was mad. He was so mad at me. He was like, oh, no, we're actually doing all the work. He's like, we actually did everything. You just keep calling too soon. And I was like, yeah, it's been like 3 weeks, man. You can't just lose my paperwork for 3 weeks and then come back and act like you were being totally honest and upfront. And he's like, no, I did all the background checks. And I was like, well, what'd you turn up? And he goes, which one are you? And I was like, I'm Greg. And he's like, well, your credit history is really terrible. He goes, it's awful, man. Oh, you don't want to know. It's confidential. I can't show you your info, but it's terrible. It's terrible. And this was funny because I just gotten a letter from my bank, and they'd given me they'd expanded my credit line because I had such good credit history. So I was like, yeah, I'm not really buying that guy. I don't honestly think that you did any kind of research on me. I don't think you did a background check. I think you just took my money and then lost all my paperwork. So after that beratement, though, that's he gave me all that. He was like all this garbage about like, yeah, I've done all this and I did all that, yeah, he got mad. And he tried to cut me in for a deal. Is what he did. He's like, look. He goes, obviously, like, you don't apartment shop a lot. And it was like, yeah, I'm starting to get the feeling that maybe I'm a little wet behind the ears with this stuff. I'm starting to get pretty wise pretty quick, though. And he goes, so I feel sorry for you. He goes, I'm going to cut you a deal. And he offered to give me half my deposit back. And this was and it was really funny because he tried to offer me the money, and I was like, no, I don't want half the deposit. I want the entire deposit back. And he's like, no, I've already done all the work. Like, you're screwing me. You made a mistake, but I feel sorry for you. I'll give you back half the money. and I just told him no. And so I got up and I walked out of there, and like about a week later, like I just wrote it off as a loss. It was one of those things like I wasn't sure if I was gonna get the deposit back or not, but I just like I wasn't gonna take that from that guy, and so I just didn't like. It turned out for the better that I didn't accept that, because what happened then later was I got a check for him with there was like this really sour little message attached in this envelope. Like he sent me a letter, and in the envelope it was like a thing. It was like he was super mad. He's like, Greg contacted the Better Business Bureau, so this is his check for his deposit, and it was kind of funny. We could just tell like he was just really upset that I'd gotten my deposit back. And so I got the full deposit back, because essentially he just tried to steal everything. He just tried to steal from me. So yes. So the place that I'm living at now, though, it's pretty good. I'm a little nervous because they have recently laid off all their staff and replaced them with younger staff, and I'm pretty sure that the younger staff is not being paid as well. We've had a few issues here and there. But this is kind of, I'm getting used to this as just being the climate of business, at least around where I live, where places, like a lot of my old favorite places have kind of gone out of business, and it seems like places that are doing well are places that are really oppressive to their employees, which is too bad, because the previous manager who I used to speak to was a really nice lady. She was an older woman, but very nice, very responsive, very professional. If I had a problem, I would just come up, it would be solved the next day, no trouble. These days, sometimes if I have issues, I have to tell them twice, and that's, like I said, it's because everybody's less experienced. I think not as well paid. What can I say? But the price of renting is going up in a lot of places, though, too. Part of that is the flipping situation. People are buying up housing, so people can't afford houses, and they're just raising rent faster than inflation in a lot of areas. But anyway, though, point is, housing contracts, leasing, stuff like that. It is a minefield. Some places are really great, and you can just sort of almost implicitly trust whoever's running the operation. Like I said, working with. Living with the one guy in the house, the landlord, he was a great guy. Never tried to swindle me. The first place I ever lived, also pretty good. And never tried to swindle me. Never tried to cheat me out of anything. Took good care of the place. Didn't take anything, on the deposit. Good place. But the places that will swindle you, though, man, the places that'll mess with you, they will really mess with you. Like, they will do everything in their power to make your life a living hell, and you are trapped there for like a year. So bottom line advice, be really careful with the lease. Like, you may not really appreciate the good places until you go someplace really bad. And that's how it was for me. After dealing with like two bad places, one of which was essentially, this is actually weird too. The place that stole my deposit, I remember I actually went to the police about it, because it was just one of those things. I was just like, yeah, they just took the money, and then they just lost my paperwork. Is that legal? And the police, actually, was funny, because this police officer I talked to, and he goes, what was the apartment? And I told him the name, and he goes, oh, that place. He goes, yeah, people come in about them all the time. And he goes, the trouble is, it's not a criminal thing. And this is why this guy was getting away with this for so long, and why it was a big deal when the Better Business Bureau contacted him, because if anybody had scrutinized him, apparently he'd been doing this to people a lot. like numerous people had been hit by this. And he goes, yeah, he does this all the time. And people come in and they talk to us about him all the time. But it's a civil thing. It's not a criminal deal. So the police do not get involved. He goes, I'm really sorry. But it was kind of funny because then he started giving me a list of like places. He's like, yeah, let me tell you where like there are apartment complexes. Like we never go up to them. And so like this cop, like he felt bad for me, and so he started telling me about like the local area, like where the good parts of town, where places never had trouble. And I was like, how about so and so down the block? And he was like, oh yeah, there's good. Like we almost never come down there for any sort of reason. And I was like, oh okay, well I'll go down and I'll talk to them. And that's yeah. That wound up being like a really good tip as far as just finding apartments. Is I don't know, if you know a cop, maybe ask him where the good places are to live, because they might very well know. I mean, they get around the city a lot, so yeah. So that's it. Be wary of apartments, be wary of leasing, be wary of housing. If you are a young person or you're about to go out and search for a new apartment, yeah, like I say, the places that won't screw you, you may not notice them, you don't appreciate them till they're gone. The ones that will screw you really hard. So don't get in a bad lease. Never get in a bad lease. Always take precautions. Always look them up online. I could have dodged the thief guy if I'd looked him up online, because there were a lot of people online who were complaining about that. And same with the other place, the place with the ants. There were a bunch of bad reviews, complaints about bugs, complaints about, you know, the apartment not being responsive, all kinds of things. Those places generally get a lot of dirty reviews. And of course they also get those lying 5-star reviews. The people who are like, yeah, 5 stars, like best apartment ever, like they sucked my dick, you know, that kind of thing. Those I think are usually left by employees, or the company will hire people to go and make like positive reviews. But if you see a lot of like really legitimate looking bad reviews, that's usually a pretty good sign that an apartment complex might be a scam. So yes. So anyway, yeah, apartments and leasing. I suppose that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.